Hey everyone! In this video, we're going to rebuild the UI for the SIG-Fit app from the Fullstack Advanced React and GraphQL course by Wes Bos. Let's get into it. Alright, so here's the website for the course in question, advancedreact.com, and if I scroll down a little bit, you can see here a video of the app that's being built throughout this course. This course has been recently refreshed and entirely re-recorded, and you can see the stack that is being used here. So in the front end, it's using React and Next.js specifically, and the back end is going to be handled by Keystone, which is going to provide the GraphQL API as well as the admin UI where you can manage your content. Okay, I've got the SIG-Fit app running here locally on port 8000. So here's what it looks like, and you can see we have a grid of products here, and there's a total of 11 products. Now for the backend, I have Keystone running on the port 3000 here, and you can see we have these 11 products here. And here's the list of the product we've been pulling up. Now this app here is going to be our reference point, and if you wonder where it's coming from, it's the app in the finished application directory from the Wes Bos/Advanced React GitHub repository. So we're gonna use this as our reference point for what we're building. We're only going to build this products page. We're not going to look at individual products listing. And we're gonna start from this almost completely empty page, which is another Next.js app running on port 7777. Let's take a look at the code for our starting point because I have a minimal amount of boilerplate to get us going. Since this is a Next.js app, let's look in the pages folder and the _app.js, which is the app shell, which is the component wrapping every page in our next app. Back in the tech stack listing, you can see we're using Apollo client to communicate with the backend. So we're going to be able to do things like fetching data from the GraphQL API with queries. I'm not going to cover how this works in this video, but you can see we have an Apollo provider here, and it wraps our entire app. Inside of this, you can see we have a header component, which we're going to use to handle this section with the logo, navigation, and search. And then we have our page component, which is going to be what gets rendered on every page. Okay, so let's look at this header component, which comes from component/header. In here, component header. And you can see we have a list of links here that we're going to use for the navigation. And for now, just an H1 that says SIG-Fits. And then we have a single page, index.js, in the pages directory. And there's a bit of boilerplate going here, but if I scroll to the bottom, essentially it just returns a paragraph tag saying product list. If I go back in my Keystone backend in the list of products and we click on the first one, you can see we have fields for name, description, a photo, which is an object with the source and an alt text, and then we have a status and a price fields. And that's basically the fields that we're asking for here in this query. Down here in my page function, you can see we use Apollo's use query, and we pass this query we've defined, and it gives us 3 items: a loading state, an error, and if everything goes well, the data. If loading is true, we're just going to return a string of loading, and if we got an error, we're going to display that error. If we get past these 2 conditions, we should have our data down here. So let's try it. Instead of returning a paragraph tag, here, I'll return an unordered list, and inside of there, I'll go data dot, and our response came nested in an object called all products, which is an array of products. So we're going to map over this. And for each product, let's return an li. Let's quickly pass the key of product.name. And let's try to output the product name here, product.name. And yeah, looks like it's working fine. Let's change product.name to product.description. And now we got the product descriptions. All right, let's look at our tech stack one more time. And you can see the SIG-Fit apps is using style components for styling. And this is where we're going to replace this with Tailwind CSS. Now, I want to be really clear. This is not a video telling you should not use style components and use Tailwind CSS instead. Style components is great. I just thought that would be an interesting exercise to build this app with Tailwind because of all the interesting skew and rotation and different design parts that we can find in the app. Things like the product titles here, which are skewed and rotated, the price, the logo, the little slants here on the navigation, etc. I'll quickly open my app in the preview here, http localhost 7777. And first thing we're going to do is install Tailwind from npm. So I'll go npm install, and we'll put this in dev dependencies, and we'll install Tailwind CSS, but also post CSS, which Tailwind CSS depends on since it is a post CSS plugin. And finally, we also add auto prefixer to add vendor prefixes to our generated CSS. Next, we need to generate 2 config files, one for Tailwind and one for post CSS. Luckily, it's super easy. I can go npx tailwind CSS init, to generate a Tailwind config file, and I'll pass the flag -p to also request a post CSS config file. And here we are, we have these two files created. So let's look at our Tailwind config file, and this is where we're going to come to customize the framework and add specific values in a minute. And if you look at our post CSS config file, you can see that it's chaining two post CSS plugins together. The first one is Tailwind CSS, and the second one is Auto Prefixer to add vendor prefixes. Since Next.js supports post CSS out of the box, whenever we use a CSS file in this project, it's going to run through Tailwind and then Auto Prefixer. So let's create a CSS file now to have sort of an entry point for our CSS. I'll go in src and create a file that I'll put in CSS/, and we can call it whatever we want. I'll call it tailwind.css. In here, I'll have three custom post CSS directives provided by Tailwind at Tailwind base. And I'll duplicate it a couple of times, and this one will be components, and the last one will be utilities. Now, I'm sure many of you have seen these squigglies and wondering what's going on here. So VS Code thinks that it's not valid CSS syntax because it is post CSS. So one thing we can do is change the language mode, and I'll change this to post CSS, which will fix it. And I'll put the name of the post CSS language extension that I've used in the description of this video. So these three Tailwind directives represent the three Tailwind layers. The base layer is a CSS reset with normalize. Tailwind components is a small layer that contains one CSS class abstraction, which is a container, and you can add more if you want. And then the bulk of Tailwind comes in this utilities layer, which is all these utility classes that we're going to compose together. So we have a CSS entry point here, and then we have a post CSS config that tells what post CSS plugin this CSS should run through. The last thing we need to do is actually require and use this CSS somewhere. So we'll go in our _app in our pages directory because this component is used for every page. And up here, I'll simply import the CSS. Import CSS/tailwind.css. Okay, and let's restart our app with npm run dev. And I'll close this and close the sidebar. And there you go. You can see now our page has been aggressively reset. The font sizes, font weights, spacing, everything has been reset and normalized. And that's our Tailwind base layer in action here. This is where global styles are applied directly to HTML elements to reset and make styles look consistent across browsers. So a quick note, I have this page here and also the reference app zoomed out to 75% because of the resolution I'm using for recording this video. You can see here 75 too, and that's why it looks a little bit smaller than what you can see here in this preview. But since both pages have the same zoom level, we're going to be able to make the UIs match. Okay, so on the topic of global styles, in the SIGFITS app using style components, most of the styles are scoped inside the style component itself. But there's also some global styles in this app. And if I go to this Advanced React Finished App Frontend Components page.js component, you can see that down here, there are some global styles applied. You can see there is a custom font here defined, Radnica Next. And this font is available in our project in the public static folder. So let's go and implement that font on our project. So I'll copy this and I'll add this to my base layer because again, it's global styles. So I could add it just under here, but I can also come here and go add layer base to specify I want to add some styles to this layer. And inside of there, I'll paste my font face declaration. Now, if I come back in the GitHub code here and I scroll down, you can see that this Radnica Next font family is applied directly on the body element. So copy this, down here, go body, and paste it here. And yep, that works. You can see now we have a different font on our project. So I think we're ready to start implementing our header section, which is going to be this navigation and search bar. So let's go in our header component. So instead of returning just an H1, we're going to wrap this in a header and move that in the middle. And looks like our logo and navigation are grouped together side by side, and then there's a separation and the search bar. So maybe let's add a wrapping div here, and we'll have a header inside of it, and we'll also have a navigation. So inside this nav, I'm going to output an anchor tag for each link. We could use a next link component, but since we're not going to any other pages, everything happens in the same page and they're kind of fake links, we're going to just use an anchor tag. So links.map, and for each link, let's output an anchor tag, and the href would be link.target, and the text will be link.name. And it also needs a key of link.name. Okay, just to see a bit clearer, I'll add some margin bottom to our header so we can push all the product descriptions a bit below. So I'll go class name. And margin bottom in Tailwind is MB for margin bottom. And if I hit Control Space, you can see that I have all the auto-completion suggestions. So margin bottom 0 is 0 pixels, 1 is 0.25 rem or 4 pixels, etc. So let's go MB8, which is 32 pixels or 2 rems. And this is going to push everything down a little bit for us. Okay, so let's start with our logo and look at the design. We're going to try to break down what it looks like in different composable bits. There's a red background, the text is white, it's uppercase, it's slightly skewed on the side, the font is fairly big and quite thick as well. So let's try and see how we can compose Tailwind CSS utilities together to achieve these combined styles. Since it's a link, I'll quickly wrap this heading into an anchor tag. And let's go apply some class names to our H1. So first, let's make the background red. I'll go bg-red, and you can see that we have shades available from 50, being almost white, super light, to 900. So none of them is going to match, but let's start with bg red 600. Okay, and let's make the text white. And maybe we'll add inline block as well, so it doesn't use the whole width of the available space. Nice, let's add some padding with p-2 to start with. So now there's a little bit of padding around the text. Let's make the text uppercase, uppercase. The font was way bigger, so let's try text XL, 2XL, and let's try text 4XL. Yeah, maybe it's a little bit too big, but we'll see. Now let's go quickly on the wrapper and add some padding and a little separation at the bottom. Class name equals, let's go p-4 for padding level 4. And let's also add this border bottom here. So for now, I'll go border B, and we have different width. I'll go with 8, and border black. So let's take a look at what we got and what the real logo looks like. And you can see everything is a bit off. The color is off, the spacing is off, the font size, etc. But we'll work on this. So I'll open the dev tools for both windows, for this one and this one. And if I inspect the H1 here, you can see that the background color hex code is FF0000, and that seems to be the color repeated everywhere across the UI. So since none of the default Tailwind reds exactly matches this color, let's go and add it in our config file. All right, so here in the Tailwind config file, you can see we have a theme object. And then we can decide to extend this theme. So I would add stuff in the extend key here if I want to add extra values to the default values of the theme. And I can also override them completely if I go and add them directly inside the theme instead. In this case, let's leave the defaults alone and we're just going to extend it with our custom values. So since I want to add a color, I'll open the colors object. And we're going to name this custom red color sick. Sick. And the hex code for this was FF0000. So now check this out. By just adding one color in our Tailwind config, if I start typing the word sick here, you can see that we've generated colors for background, to, via, and from, which are gradient colors, a ring colors for outline, for focus outlines, text color, divide color, border colors, placeholder colors, ring offset colors. And all of these things have been generated because Tailwind iterates over this colors object and generates lots of utilities for you. So I can replace my bg red 600 here for our heading tag with bg sick. And now if I compare both logos, they have the exact same color. If I look at the font size of the logo here, you can see that it's 40 pixels. Now here in our design, we've used the text 4XL class, which is 36 pixels. And if we look, 4XL is 36 and 5XL is 48. So we need something in between if we want to really match this design. So once again, I can come in my config file and extend this time the font size object. And here I can add key value pairs. The key is going to be the name of the class name it generates, and the value, well, the value. And it's totally up to you what you name it here, but since we have 4 and 5XL, maybe it's in between, we could say, well, let's go with 4.5XL. And this is going to be 40 pixels, or since the font sizes are defined in rems, I'll go with 2.5 rem. 2.5 times 16 being 40. And if I save this, you can see that now we have a 4.5 XL value, which is equivalent to 40 pixels, which is exactly what we want. So now we have the color and the font size matching. Next, let's take care of this little skew slanting of the logo. If I inspect here, you can see that there's a transform of skew minus 7 degrees applied. Now, Tailwind does come with skew utilities, so I'll first apply a toggle of transform, which is necessary to use before you apply any transform. And I'll go skew x, and you can see the default values here are 0, 1, 2, 3, 6, and 12, or minus these. So Wes was using minus 7, so let's go with minus 6 here, which is the closest that we get, and we should see a slant happening. And you can see that's starting to look fairly close now. So once again, if you were precious about this minus 7 value, you could come here and open the skew object and add a minus 7 value, which would be minus 7 degrees. And since I'm already in here and I know we're going to use a different skew value somewhere else, I'll also add minus 20 and add minus 20 deg. And this minus 20 value is going to be used for these slanted separators here. So how do you know about what values are available in this theme, what each object is named, and what values are there by default? There's a few ways to do this. You can look at the Tailwind documentation website, and each object in this theme will have its own page with the default values and how to customize. The autocomplete IntelliSense also gives you a good idea of what values are available. And if you want a single file that explicitly shows all the default values of the theme, you can generate a full config file. So let's do this. We're actually not going to use this config file, but just look at it as a reference. So I'll go npx tailwind css init, and I'll name this one demo tailwind-full.config.js. And I will pass the flag --full to say, hey, please make the full config that is explicitly defining the default theme. So this file is not going to be used in our project unless we explicitly specify the path to this config file. But let's take a look at it quickly. So you can see now our theme object is fully fleshed out. We have the screens object, which is our responsive breakpoints. And we haven't even talked about this, but you'll see how you can apply responsive styles with Tailwind. We have a colors object with the default colors. A spacing scale, which generates utilities for margin, padding, height, translate, and a few other values, etc. You can see gradients, background, position, box shadows, and a lot of things in there. So if you want a reference of what the default theme offers, that's a good way to do it. And you could use this for your project, but I think it's a much better idea to have the default config file generated and then explicitly extend only what you want to change in that file. So let's look at our logo. It looks like we've actually nailed the padding internally to this logo inside of the red surface, but we need a little bit more spacing around it. So maybe here on the wrapper, which is around the logo, we can go P-6. Oh, and I need to restart my server here. Okay, so it's getting really close. So let's work on the navigation now, and we might come back to the logo after that. So right now our navigation is under the logo, but we probably want to have it side by side when the screen is large enough, and otherwise have it under but centered. So actually I'll switch to a responsive view of this preview, which is now going to allow us to drag the sides and mimic that we have enough horizontal space by zooming out of the view. So we're going to work on this wrapper here, which contains the logo and the navigation. And this is going to be our flex container. So I'll add the class of flex, but I want the flex direction to be column on a small screen. So I'll go flex col, flex direction column. And I also want the elements to be centered. So because we're in the flex column mode, I'll go items center for align items center. So now what we want to do is when we have enough space, maybe at the large or extra large breakpoints, we want to move these links on the side. Because right now it's always center aligned on top of each other. So this next class name we're going to apply is going to target the extra large breakpoint and up, because this is a min width media query. So I'll start a class with the name of the breakpoint, XL, followed by a column, which is going to use a responsive variant of any class name that I'd applied. So here I have flex col defined by default, and from the extra large breakpoint, I want to switch this to flex row. All right, I've closed the responsive preview here in VS Code, and we'll look at the responsive preview in the browser directly, so it's a little bit easier. Okay, let's just add some margin top to this nav element for some separation with the logo on the smaller screens. So here in my nav, I'll go class name empty. Let's go with empty 4. But we actually do not want this margin top once we switch to the side-by-side view, because now you can see that the alignment is off because of the margin top. So again, XL breakpoint, we go empty 0 to cancel that out. And now we should have our align items nicely set. Now we're gonna make our navigation a flex container itself to handle its positioning. So here I'll go flex. And at that breakpoint where we are in the side-by-side, we want to justify content end to push it to the right here. So I can go XL, justify, end. And that should move our navigation to the end. Or let's also add a flex1 class to make sure that the flex element takes the entire available space. There you go. Okay, let's add some spacing between each of these navigation links. So down here in my anchor tag, I'll add the class name. And up to now, we've just applied p dash that applies padding all around, but we're gonna use px dash, which is going to be padding left and right only, padding horizontal or x-axis. And let's go with px8 here. See what it looks like. What do we have here actually? We have 30 pixels of padding horizontal here. And the font size is 20 pixels. px8 is actually 32, which is not bad at all. Again, we could add 7.5 and add very specific values. Let's go with that for now. And I'll change the text to text. And how do we get close to 20 pixels? Well, look, it looks like text XL is 20 pixels, so that's exactly what we want. We'll also make that uppercase. And it looks pretty good. So when I make the screen smaller, you can see that we have a couple of problems. The links text is collapsing here, and there's not enough space available here. So first thing, let's add a flex shrink 0 class to say that the elements should never shrink past their minimum width. We're going to take this px8 class here and only apply it from the XL breakpoint. And the default padding should be less, so maybe px4. So that's a little bit better. Let's also make maybe the text a bit smaller. So same deal. This is going to be applied only for the XL breakpoint. And let's go with text small for smaller breakpoints. I'll grab this. You don't have to move it, but just for the sake of organization, I'll put the extra large breakpoint specific classes at the end. And yeah, now that works. But we'll always have this problem where at some point it gets too small. And you can see that it overflows on the side. So let's make the flex container wrap here, actually. So here in my nav, I'll go flex wrap. So now it's going to wrap onto lines, which is nice. We probably want this to be aligned. So in my navigation, you can see that at the XL breakpoint, we go justify end. And before this, we want justify center. And that should now centerline it nicely. Good, so now this is starting to look good. We have that navigation wrapping, and eventually it jumps off. We could probably add some in-between changes. So maybe here on the LG breakpoint, we're gonna go with text LG and LG padding X. Let's go with 6. So now we should have 3 little iterations. Small text with small spacing, medium text, or actually large text with more spacing, and finally jumping here. Nice. Okay, let's tackle these little slanted separators next. So they're currently implemented with a before element. So Tailwind out of the box doesn't support before and after pseudo elements, but we can create this with an extra element, which is going to be absolutely positioned. So on my individual links here, I'll add a class of relative. And then before my link name, I'll add a span. And this one will have a class name of absolute. And we're going to go top 0, left 0. And let's give it a height and width and background color so we can see it. So we'll go width 1, H full, and BG gray 200. Let's try this. Let me maybe make it a bit darker just so it's more obvious on the video. So our separators are here, but they're not expanding on the full height because our nav is actually not using the full height of the container. So we're gonna have to change a couple of things here. Back in our main Flex container, which contains the logo and the navigation, we're currently setting item center for align item center, but on the extra large breakpoint, we want these aligned items to become stretched, so it stretches out on the whole height available. So XL items stretch. So this exposes the next problem, which is that we have applied padding on the Flex container here. We don't want to have some padding vertical, so we'll remove it and maybe apply it as a margin on the logo instead. Up here, instead of P-6, I will go PX-6, which will remove the vertical padding. And now let's go on the heading tag itself and add some margin vertical with MY, and we'll also use 6. And we want these to center align on this vertical thing. So we're going to make each link, which is now using the whole height, a Flex container, and then use item center for align item center to vertically center it. So I'll go down in my links here and go Flex items center. And that should vertically center our elements. So let's try to make it look like this. And very quickly, a quick fix here. We have added the skew -7, but we actually haven't used it. So let's change that to 7. Sorry about that. So if I look at these separators here, we can see that they have a width of 2 pixels and a height of full, which we already have. But currently we have applied W1, which is 0.25 rem, which is 4 pixels. So we kind of want half of that. And luckily there's exactly that, 0.5, which is 2 pixels. And let's go with BG Gray 200, which is closer to the real value here. And now we can apply this transform with the transform toggle and -skew X, and remember that we added the value -20 for this specific occasion, so let's do this. All right, let me increase just a little bit the margin top and bottom on this logo. So up here, I'll go MY, and let's go with 7. And if we look at this border bottom here, you can see that it's actually 10 pixels, and we currently have 8. So we could come here and for border width, we could add a 10, which is 10 pixels. And then here, replace this border B8 with border B10. Let's look at it. And yeah, now it's starting to look very close. And let's look one more time at Wes Bos's global styles here. And you can see that he redefines a black custom CSS property to 393939. And we're going to add this color. I'll go here and define black. And this is actually going to redefine the existing black, which is part of the Tailwind config. And we're going to go 393939. So here, since we use border black, we have now updated this color to be this exact dark gray, black defined. Okay, next, let's add this little badge here next to the cart. And here where we output the name of the link, I'll add a little bit of logic. I'll say if link.name equals my cart, so that's going to be only the last one, and use a ternary operator. So if that's the case, we're going to have a little bit more markup. So I'll go span class name flex. And then inside of it, we're going to have a span with our link name. And another span. And inside of there, we're going to handle the badge. So we're going to go class name equals BG sick for the red color. Text white. And let's go with the fixed height and width. So H, let's go 9, W 9. So it's a perfect square. And rounded full. You can see all these rounded corners options. We're going to go with full, so it's going to be a perfect circle. And let's just add number 1 here to pretend there's one cart item. So it's not going to be ready yet, but just let's look at what it is. Oh, and before I can do this, I need to have the other condition, if it's not the case, where we're just going to have the link.name. So you can see now on the last element, I have a bullet with my cart. So it's all out of sorts. The circle is a bit too big. It's not vertically aligned, so let's fix that. Up here in my flex container, I'll add items center. And I also add some spacing between the two elements with space -x for the x-axis. And let's go with space x1. So now the circle should be aligned and nicely separated. And we might make it space x2. And let's change the height to h7, width 7. That looks about right, but now we want the text inside to be centered. So I'm going to also make this a flex container and go items center and justify center. So now it's going to be perfectly placed in the middle. And I can probably make the circle just a little bit bigger with 8, 8, and 8. And we keep going around in circles, but if we look, it's 30 by 30. And what we have used here is 32 by 32. So we could add in the config file another value for this, but let's go with that. So as you've noticed, I'm not going for the exact specific values absolutely everywhere. I think as long as you understand that you can go in the Tailwind config file and customize the design system to be exactly the values that you want, you can understand that you could replicate this UI pixel by pixel. Now we have a little bit too much spacing here because we've applied padding to the wrapper and also then to the link. So we should undo this. I can go padding left 6. So it's only going to apply it here on the left and not on the right. All right, let's look at the hover state next. Currently, nothing happens on a hover. But if we look in the reference app, when I hover over a link, there's this nice little bloopy animation happening. So there's a transition happening on hover, and it looks like there's a custom easing curve, and we're going to try implement that. So again, it's implemented with the after pseudo element, but we'll use our own element. So let's trigger the hover state on the button just to see it. You can see that we have a transform translate x by 50%, and then a custom transition timing function. I don't think we're going to use translate x here, but we're going to transform the scale instead, scaling from 0% width to 100% width, and we're going to apply this custom timing function. So we want our little underlined squiggly thing to be positioned absolutely in reference to the actual link text. So that thing here. So we're going to wrap this whole thing in another span, and this span will have a class name of relative. So now we can absolutely position something within that little span, which is just the height of the text and not the full height, like the anchor tag, which is item stretched. So let's try that. We can probably go here before the closing of the span and create another span, which is going to be our element. So class name equals absolute. This time the width is going to be full, but the height is going to be, let's go with h1, and the color is going to be BG sick. So let's try that. We're probably going to have to change the positioning. Yeah. So let's make it bottom 0. Nice. And then left 0. Aha, really good. Actually, I think it might look a little bit better with minus bottom 1, which moves it by 4 pixels down. And let's add some rounded corners here. So let's go rounded small, just for a nice little. So it's quite subtle, but it looks quite nice. Okay, so now what we want to do is that on hover, we want to make it appear and we don't want to show it. So let me show you first how to handle the hover state here. So just like we did for responsive classes with XL for the extra large breakpoint, we can target different states like hover or focus or active with a prefix. So I'll go hover here, and let's go BG and maybe green 300. So what should happen now is the underline should become green when we hover it. But you'll probably see that there's a problem. So that works, but as you can see, it only works when I hover the span itself, not the whole link, which is that whole height. So we want to change the color of this span when we hover over the anchor tag, the parent anchor tag. And we can use something called group hover, the group hover variant in Tailwind to do that. So I'll go all the way up here in my link and add a class of group. And this group will mean that anything that's nested within this element can be targeted via the group-hover variant. So with this group hover, it's going to listen to the hover state on the element with the class of group, which is our anchor tag here. And so now the background should change to green whenever I hover anywhere on the link. Yep, look at this, beautiful. So instead of changing the background color on a hover, we want to change the scale and then add a transition. So let me apply a transform class. And let me show you this. I could go scale x for the x-axis, 50. So if I go scale x 50, it should be half the width. And yeah, you can see now the links are half the width. And if I go scale x 0, they are going to be completely squashed into nothingness. So now they're completely gone. And now on group hover, I want the scale to be back to scale x 100, which is the default. But you will see that it's not working. And the reason is the group hover variant is not enabled by default on everything for some file size concerns. And so you have to go and enable it in the config file. Group hover works on the most common things you do on changes like background color or text color, but not here for the scale. So I'm gonna go in my config file once again. And if we go down there, you can see that we have a variance key, which also has an extend object. So here, I want to extend the scale key, and I want to add a variant, which is group hover. So I've now added the group hover variant for scale transforms. So if we go once again, it should now work on hover. Great. So now it's transformed from 0 to 100 immediately without any transition. So let's add a transition class. I'll go transition. And by default, it's going to have a default easing curve and duration and all of that. So we can have a look at what it looks like. And yeah, that looks nice already. That's pretty nice. But let's go and try and recreate this little bloop where it overshoots a little bit and then comes back to the full width. So down here, we have this cubic Bezier curve here that we are going to copy. And Tailwind has easing utilities for transition timing functions. So you have ease linear in, out, and in-out. So we're going to add our custom one. So let's go up here, and after the border width, transition timing function. And let's call this one bloop. And here we're going to paste our cubic Bezier function to be an exact match. So adding this transition timing function will generate an ease bloop, which we're going to go and apply here, ease dash bloop. Let's go. And it might be a little bit quick. Yeah, you can see it's kind of jumpy because part of the easing duration is set for the initial slow start and slow finish. So we're going to add a little bit of duration with duration, and let's go with maybe 500. 500 might be a little bit too slow, but you'll get to appreciate that bloop. And I think we want to go with 400 here. Look at that. That's amazing. I can actually add an underline. If we look at the logo here, it gets an underline. Wes has set the text decoration underline for links by default on everything. We're not going to do this here, but in that case for the logo, I'll go and add this. So let me go to the top. And here on the link itself, I'll go class name. And on hover, we want to go underline. So now, when we go and hover this, we get this underline. Great, so let's move on to the next element, which is that search here. So I'll scroll down, and after our nav here and our div container, which is a flex container for the nav and logo, we're going to have another element, which is just an input placeholder. We'll say search for an item, So here it is, and let's make it a bit bigger. So we're gonna go with class name, width of full, age of 16. Yeah, that's much better. For now, let's add some horizontal padding as well. So px4 will do. And we also add this border bottom, which is actually you hear that? So we're going to add this border bottom here, which is actually the border bottom of the entire header element. In my header, I will add border B and border black. So we have a black border bottom. And let's compare with the reference app. And yeah, it's pretty close. This here is actually not styled as it really is in the SigFit app, so I won't bother too much to match it. Okay, so I think we can move on and handle now our grid here. We'll skip this pagination for now because we don't have any pages. This is just a single page in our rebuild. But if we have time at the end, we might go and build this UI quickly. But I think we can now focus on this. So just so the spacing feels right, I'll just add an element that kind of feels like this. So this whole element is 552 pixel by 62. So let's add like a colored div element as a placeholder for now. Okay, so I can move out of my header and we're now going to go in our page index.js. So we're actually going to add a main tag here and put everything in there since this is the main section of our page. And up here, we'll have our pagination. So for now, it's just going to be a div class name of bg_gray200. So we saw that the height was 62 pixels. So what gets us close to this? We're going to go with h16 is 64 pixels. And let's go with the max width container of XL 576 will work fine. And we'll also add some rounded large. And yeah, okay, that works. But as you can see, it's flush against the left. And in the reference app, we have this nice max width container, which is exactly 1000 pixels wide. You can see in the code file that we've looked at a couple of times here, there is an inner styles constant, which is a max width container with margin left auto, left and right auto, and padding 2 rems. And this width is defined here, 1000 pixels. So since we don't want a max width container on the header, the main here is a perfect place to put it for now. So we're going to go class name equals max w. And what do we have? 5XL is 1024 pixels. So we'll go with that. And let's also go mx auto, which is going to set margin left and right auto. Let's go px. We're going to go with 6. Let me quickly add a visual debugging background of red 100, just so we can see the surface occupied. And that's looking pretty good. And you know what? Let's add a max width quickly. And we'll call it 1000. And it's going to be 1000 divided by 16, 62.5 rem. So here, instead of max width 5XL, we're going to go with max width 1000, which is going to be just a little bit smaller. There you go. And the padding is actually 2 rems on this page container here. So we can increase our px for all around -8. Because the HTML font size has been reset to 10 pixels, it's actually 20 pixels here. Nice. So now if we remove our background red, I'm quickly going to go in my header and remove, we had this margin bottom 8 to create separation before, but now we're going to handle this directly on this main section. So let's scroll down to here and we're going to handle this grid now. I'm going to come here to my unordered list and I'm going to tell the parent, the UL, that I want it to be display grid. And I'm also going to specify that I want 2 grid columns with grid cols 2. So now if I inspect this, you can see that this is a CSS grid. We probably want to add a gap between each element. So I can also add gap, and let's go with something fairly big, gap 16. And here we go. Now we have a really nice gap between each element. So instead of just showing the product description, we're going to go and grab the image, the price, the title, description we have, and start constructing these little cards. So the first thing I'll do is add some classes on the li element, which is the card itself, the card main wrapper. So I'll add a shadow, and we're going to go with extra large here. Let's take a look. And again, we can come here and grab this BS, which I love the naming of box shadow. And then in our config file, I can add box shadow, and we're gonna call it BS because why not? And paste that. So now I should have a shadow BS. Let's give it a try. And there it is. So it's all looking a little bland and plain at the moment. So let's go grab the images to make it more interesting. And I'll also add quickly a margin top on the top of our grid here with empty. Let's go with empty 6, just to create some separation. Actually, I'll go with empty even 8. So images. Let's wrap this in a p tag because that's where it's going to go eventually. And now I'll just add an image tag. The source is going to be product.photo.image.product.photo.image.public URL transformed. And the alt tag product.photo.alt text. And now all our images are coming in, which is nice. They all have different heights, which is not what we want. If you look at the reference app, no matter what page you go to, every image is nicely cropped to the same dimensions. So if we inspect, we can see that the images are 400 pixels in height. So let's add some class names to our image. And we'll go with H and something that gets us close to 400. Actually, 400 would be exactly H 125 rems. So let's quickly go and add this to our config file. Spacing. And I'll go 125 rem. So now we can go with H100, which is exactly 400 pixels. And now you can see it's not necessarily using the whole width or the whole height. So fair enough, I can go W full, but now we're going to have some distortion happening. So let's find an image where it's quite obvious. Nah, none of them is really obvious, but the images are kind of distorted. Maybe this one looks a little bit smooched out. I guess if the height was 20, it would be more obvious. There you go. See how it distorts the images? And you can fix that with using object fit, which is kind of going to crop the image, kind of like a background image cover. The image is never going to be distorted. It's going to fill whatever space it needs without breaking the resolution, the aspect ratio. So I'm going to go with object cover. And now you can see that these images are nicely filling the entire space available. So I'll change the height back to 100. And now we should have our nice cards, always with the same height and width, which is great. Okay, let's add the rest of the data, the price, the title, the buttons, and then we're going to style all of this. So here I'm going to go with the H2 tag for the title. So product.title. And before the image here, I'm going to go with the, let's go with the P tag and product.price. So let's look at it quickly. And looks like I don't have my title, so maybe I've done something wrong. Oh, it's product.name. This is why. Product.name. So there you go. We have the titles and you can see the price at the top, but the price is not formatted nicely. So now if you look at the top, I have this format money function that is making it pretty formatted. So I can wrap my product.price here in a format money function. And now it's going to format the currency properly. So we want this price to be up here on the top right corner, slightly rotated and slightly off image. So to do this, I need to make the li container relative, so I can absolutely position this within it. So next to our shadow BS, we're going to go with relative, and then our p tag here can be absolute. And instead of top and right 0, we're going to go minus top 1 and minus right 1. As you can see, it's moving it by 4 pixels. So it should put it to the top right, slightly off. And let's add a BG of sick, BG sick, text white, just so we can see it a little bit better. Okay. Now, if we inspect that here, the font size is 30 pixels. What else do we have? We have a rotation somewhere of 3 degrees. Cool, so Tailwind has that value out of the box. We have a font weight of 600, padding of 5 pixels all around. You can see the top and right is actually minus 3 pixels. So we have minus 4 in ours, and the next value. So you have right 0, which is 0. We have right pixel, px, which is 1. And then we have 0.5, which is 2. But then we jump at 4. So we could add a value for 3, or we could agree that it's OK for here to use that, which I will make the call it is OK. Let's change the font size. We said 30 pixels, so text. What do we have? 3XL is 30 pixel. Font, is it bold? Bold is 700, so we can go semi-bold, which is 600. We had some padding of 5 pixels, so P-1.5 is going to be 6 pixels. So again, you can add a value, but I think we're going to go with that. You can also see that the line height here is set to 1. So that's why when I added 6 pixel padding, it looks way more vertically. So let's add the line height with leading none, which is line height 1. And that should come much closer to yes. So the last thing we want to do is to add a transform and rotate of 3. And look at this, it's starting to look very similar to what we have. That's very nice. And it looks like our grid is slightly bigger, so maybe I'll make the padding just a little bit smaller here. Yeah, that looks really close now. So let's tackle the title next. So I'll move down here, and our product.name is actually a page link. So let's wrap that in the anchor tag. Okay, so we're going to compose some styles between the h2 and the anchor tag. I'll add a class name here, and I'll make the bg sick and text white, uppercase. I think the text size is the same as the logo, which is 4.5 XL. Leading, let's go with leading snug. Okay, nice. And now let's add some styles to the parent to center it and make the transforms. So here, class name equals text center and transform minus skew. I think it's minus Q7 once again. But there's also a rotation, which I believe is just 1 degree. So we got to look at the wrapper. It's a H3 here, but that's okay. Yes, we have a rotate of minus 1 degrees. So we can do this with minus rotate 1. Oh, apologies, it's actually not uppercase. And it's moved up by something. So if we look here, there's a transform probably, or margin top. There you go, margin top minus 3 rem. So we can apply that to here. Minus M for margin, T for margin top. Let's go with 8, probably. Yeah, that looks about right. Very nice. So we want to add some padding on the sides on our links. So down there, I can go PX, and I think 2 will work fine. Yeah, very nice. If I zoom over here, you can see that we have a really nice text shadow inside on the letters. Now, Tailwind doesn't support text shadows out of the box. You can extend Tailwind by adding utilities or creating a plugin that brings new utilities. Here, we'll just add some utilities, one single utility for text shadow. I will inspect this and find the text shadow. Is it on the H3? Here, text shadow. So let me copy all this. And I'm going to go in my CSS file. So here we have the 3 layers, remember? We've added a base layer, and now we're going to add some utilities. So add layer utilities. And let's call that class text shadow. And we're going to go text shadow, that thing. If you had a color called shadow, like text red 600 makes the text red 600. So text shadow would maybe have a little clashing happening. In our case, we don't have a color or something that could clash called shadow, so we should be good. Back in our element, we'll add that class of text shadow. So let's zoom in on this hoodie, and I'm not sure if you can see it on the video, but it's definitely there. We have that nice text shadow, and we can inspect here, and you'll see the text shadow apply with the same values that we had here. And it's actually looking very close. We can, now that we zoomed in, I can see that I can increase the padding a little bit to px maybe 3. And the skew looks different. Was it only 6? Oh, it's 5 degrees here, not 7. All right, so let's be precise and also add -5 because we don't have it out of the box. And go here and add skew 5. And now it should be very close. Okay, that's good enough for me, considering that we are zoomed in. Let's zoom out here too. And now let's handle this paragraph here that has font size 15, padding 0 and 30. So in our product description here, class name, so we're going to go py and it's 15 pixels. So we can go with, let's go with 4 and px, probably 8, I guess. Yeah, 8 is 32. So let's go with that. And that works quite well. You can see the line height is quite different. I think Wes has a line height of 1.5 set by default. So if we look up here one more time, you can see that the line height, is set to 2 for the body element for everything. Does this mean that the line height here is 2? Yep. We can use 2 rems here actually. Right. Another thing I've just thought of is if we zoom in here, you might see that there's a slight border. So the cards have a 1 pixel border around them. So it's a border of 1 pixel solid. So maybe let's just add that quickly here. So border, and the default border is gray 200, which is probably a bit too dark. So I'll go border gray 100. And actually, you almost can't see that one, so I'll go back to border gray 200. It just composes better with the box shadow to give a little bit of separation. So let's add these buttons here after our product description. I'll have a div, and we are going to use a grid here. So let's create 3 buttons quickly. Button 1, 2, 3. So the first one is saying edit, and we'll add a little pencil icon. Next one says add to cart. Do we have a little cart icon emoji? Yes, we do. And the last one, delete. We can probably add a no emoji. So we have our 3 buttons here. They're not placed right, but we're going to fix this. So class name grid, and we want grid calls 3. And just like that, it should use nicely the 3 columns. When the text is a different length, we have this problem. We will fix it. I can make this whole card a flex container with flex call, so it stacks vertically, and then tell this paragraph section to always use the full height that it can with flex 1. So let's try this. I'll go in my li, and I also add flex call. So that should change nothing. But now if I come down in my paragraph, I can tell this paragraph to be flex 1 to grow as much as it can. And now this paragraph is going to grow and take as much space as it can compared to the thing on the other side in the same row. Right, that's perfect. Let's come in our buttons. And this will have a border top. Let's make it border gray 300, which might be a bit too dark, but you'll see it better while I work on it. Let's add some spacing on each of these buttons. So all 3 buttons, I'll add a class name of p-3 for padding. Nice. And then to handle the separators here, I could add some borders on each button, but there's a much nicer way to handle it on the parent level with a divide utility. So we want to divide the x-axis. You can also divide the y-axis on vertical stacks. And divide x by itself will apply gray 200 color and 1 pixel. So let's look at it just like this. And you can see the gray. Let me once again make it divide gray 300. So it's a little bit darker. And here if I could have a different width of 2, 4. So if I go divide x 4, you would have a border that is 4 pixels thick here. But in our case, we're very happy with the divide x, which is just 1 pixel. So we get these 3 buttons looking pretty good. Let's maybe quickly add a hover state. So for my 3 buttons here, on hover, I'll go BG gray 100, just to make the background a little bit darker on hover. Very nice. And this is looking pretty good. Oh, we don't have our underline on hover here. So in here, I'll just add hover, underline. And I've just noticed that when the text wraps on 2 lines, the line height is just too big that you can see it's barely touching here. So where we have our letting snug, which is 1.375, we might go with letting tight, which is 1.25. Now Wes has 1.3 there, so again you could go and add that value. And I think now it looks really nice like this. So if we compare this to something that wraps on 2 lines on the reference app, like here, this is looking pretty darn close. So here is 1.3 line height, and we currently have 1.25, so it's slightly snuggier, slightly more condensed. Okay, so currently we have set our grid to be 2 columns wide at any breakpoint, and I'm pretty sure this is not going to work at small screens, so let's have a look. And you can see it gets all squished up. So in my grid container here, you can see that we set grid calls to for all breakpoints. And I think we want to do this only for, let's say, the medium breakpoint. So let's have a look. So it should be 1 column and then 2 columns. So now we got 1 column. And as we go, it gets quite big before it jumps. I think even that is just too narrow. So let's switch to LG. But now we're going to have a big problem where the cards get way too wide before the switch. Yeah, that looks good. So here we're going to add a max width container and center it so it looks decent. So the max width container is going to happen on the LI, the card itself, not the container. So I'm going to go max width, let's go with LG. And we also want to center these with MX auto for margin left and right auto. So now, look at this. We start with small, and eventually it kind of maxes out at a certain width, which is nice. And then it jumps to 2 column. And I just realized that when we removed the margin bottom on the header that we had as a placeholder, we kind of lost the spacing here. So instead of just adding margin top, if I go back in my navigation, you can see here we have on the nav empty 4 that we cancel out on extra large. So I'm going to change this empty dash in both instances to my, so it applies it also to the bottom. So y-axis is top and bottom. Right. So now that's looking decent. Yeah, like that. Okay, so next I think we can actually look at this pagination component now. So I'll scroll back up here, and you can see that we have a previous link, then a text, page 2 of 3, 11 items total, and then a next. So we won't actually build a real pagination that works with the backend like it does here. But what we're going to do is have some hard-coded text values, but just recreate that UI. So we got 2 links here and then 2 bits of text. All right, so let's come up here and add a bit of space, and I'll just add the comment for products list. And we're going to get rid of this and do our work here. So let's start with the markup. I'll have a div here wrapping everything. And then I'll have a link that says, what is it? Left arrow, prev, and one that says next. But instead of the left arrow, we have a right arrow. And in between, we have two paragraphs. The first one says, so like I said, we're not using the actual data from the API. We're just hard-coding these text values here. And the second one says 11 items total. So there's our starting point. One thing to notice in the reference app, you can see that if I'm on the page 1, the prev link gets disabled and I can't click on it. And then they become both active. And if I hit the last page, this becomes disabled. So since we have one single page, we're going to actually disable prev and next on that page. So currently I can hover on these links and click, and it goes nowhere, but you can see that the little hash has been added here. So one thing I can do for both these links is add a class name of pointer events none. So this is going to disable any events on this link, like hover and click. So you can see now nothing happens, which is perfect. Let's also make these links text gray, and we'll go with something like 400. It's probably a bit too light, so 500. Again, if we wanted the perfect color, we can go and add this, I think it's called light gray variable that Wes Bos has in the course. Yep, light gray, to have the exact gray. But that looks pretty decent here, so let's keep going. Next, I'll set the parent element to be a flex wrapper, so they go side by side. So up here, class name equals flex. And let's also add a border to this container. And as you can see now, it goes the whole width. So instead of flex, we can use inline flex. So it doesn't span across the whole width, inline flex. Perfect. Next, let's add a bit of padding on each button. So if we look here, we have padding of 15 and 30. So let's add a class name attribute to both our p tags here, class name. And then I'll select this class name here and the next three, 1, 2, 3. So I'll go with px. And I think we want 8 to be as close as 30 pixels as possible. Yeah, let's go with 8. And let's go with py-4. So it's not exactly the same values, but that should get us really close without adding an extra value. Next, let's add some margin top, empty-6 on the actual container. And we also add some routing corners with rounded elgo LG. So actually the margin top is a little bit too big, so maybe empty-4 will do. Yeah, that's pretty close. And actually I'll make the padding horizontal on all 4 elements to probably 7. So it looks a little bit closer. Yeah, that's really good. So let's add these separators. And instead of adding border right and border left on the children element, once again, we can use our divide utility here, divide x. Very nice. And if we look at the font size, it's 15 pixels, so it's just a little bit smaller than the default value. So if we apply it on the parent, it will trickle down to all 4 children. Text SM is 14 pixels, and text base is 16. So once again, we could add value in between. Okay, I want to do one more thing here, is add an aria disabled true label to both links, since they are disabled. True. And you can see the space here is bigger here. So, okay, so the pagination itself applies some margin of 2 rems. Because the HTML font size has been reset to 10 pixels, it's actually 20 pixels here. So in here we have empty-8, which is 32 pixels, which is too big. If we want 20, I think we can go empty-5. Okay, let's look at how it looks on small screen, and my guess is not great. There's probably not enough space for it to show up. Yeah. So we probably maybe can hide these 2 elements and just have the links on small screen. So let's try that. So for my 2 paragraphs here, I will go and display them by default hidden. So that will hide it at every screen size. And then from, let's say, the MD breakpoint, we're gonna display and back to display block. So now they should be hidden and then show up. And we can probably show them actually on the SM breakpoint already. Can we? Yeah, that just works. And the last thing we want to do is center align this thing until we hit. So here we would like this to be center aligned until we reach this 2-column layout, where then it makes sense to having left align. And it feels kind of odd because our column here is centered that it shoots off the side. All right, so to do that, I'll wrap my pagination into a little container. There's possibly better ways to do it, but this is the one I can think of right now as I record this. And I will give it a class of text center, so that will center it. So that looks great, but we want to undo this once we hit the 2-column setup, which is the large breakpoint, I believe. Yeah, you can see here LG grid calls 2. So next to text center, I will go LG text left. So now we have a nice pagination that looks decent at all breakpoints. So here's our website on mobile. And in between, and finally, more in between. And once it reaches the desktop view, it all looks pretty good. And here's in comparison the reference site. And I think we're pretty close. Oh, there's the pagination at the bottom here. So we could copy this, probably extract it to a component, and then use it twice at the top and the bottom. So let's do that quickly. I'll grab this div here and cut it. And we go to the bottom and go function, pagination. And we'll return this like this. I think the MT4, now that we've added a wrapper, might go on the top element. And we might find out that we need different spacing for both. So we might actually move it completely out of this pagination and apply it per case. So I'll go here, and now I'll use my pagination component. And also after the UL here. Now we have the pagination at the top and pagination at the bottom. And spacing-wise, I think it's, yeah, actually that works. Looks like our main container could have a little bit spacing on the bottom, like you can see here. So where does this come from? Does it come from the main? Okay, so there's the margin bottom on the pagination and also there. So in our case, I'll go up in the main tag and maybe just add MB4 to add a little bit of margin bottom. And look at this, that looks like the exact same value. Great. All right, I think this time this is the end of this video. If you have any questions, you can leave comments in the video. You can reach to us on Twitter, GitHub discussions. There's plenty of ways to start a discussion. And if you want to learn more about React, about GraphQL, about Keystone, be sure to check Wes Bos's course, Fullstack Advanced React and GraphQL. It's a really good course. Wes is a great teacher. There's a lot of fun in these videos. I've learned a ton from Wes, and I'm sure you can as well. All right, thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one.